Okay, I'm working on a 1934 Con tenor saxophone. It's a transitional model, and basically the first thing I'm doing is using a number 39 flat graver, and I'm doing the basic pattern, and I'm not really working from any stencil or anything, I'm just making up as I go. So basically the stroke is a very fine back and forth rocking motion like that. What it does is it gently walks along the metal, and so you have to be fairly cautious about where you're pointing, because if it's pointing at something and you slip, you can actually puncture whatever that is, and in worst cases it's your hand. And what I'm doing is simply putting the angle of the graver, the angle of the horn on my lap, so that it's easy to control where it's going, and also control how I'm directing the stroke. You notice at the end of the stroke, the graver pushes up and takes out the piece of metal, the little curl of metal at the end of the stroke. So, first thing you do is when you're going to start a new cut, you sink the graver in just a little bit in the metal, like that, so it doesn't give, and then you start with the walk from there. The reason that you do that is because if your graver is just slightly not sharp, you can actually slip really badly and leave a nice big scratch, which we don't want to do. So, now one of the design elements you can do when you're working in small spaces like this is bring lines around. Even though they converge here, you can bring the line back around like so, and start from where your lines converge, just slightly before it, like right here, and then come around to the end of the line that you just did, like that, and add a little bit of a 3D element so it looks like it's folded over. And you'll see that on some of Mark 6s, especially around up in this area where the logo is, there's a leaf that actually comes around like this and folds over, and that's how they do that. So what I'm going to do is just bring this line around, and continuing work on this clown tenor. I'm basically getting ready to work around the bell seam. Now, when you're engraving an older horn like this, and to some degree even newer horns, you'll be able to see where the bell seam lines up, and basically this is where the flat brass gets rounded around and soldered, and basically you can see these little tooth-shaped pieces right here. It might be kind of hard to see on the video, but essentially the bell seam is soldered together. And when you're engraving, there's always a risk, especially when you're going over this, that you're going to slip, because this is a much harder part of the brass, and if you get the solder is really hard. So when you're designing, or when you're thinking about what design is going to go where, always keep this bell seam in mind, because it's really easy to have a mistake. And in fact, this is kind of interesting on this horn. If you look very closely at the S in USA that the original Con engraver did here, this is the only original engraving on this horn, but you'll notice that right over the seam there is a spot where the S is discontiguous. So basically the engraver was going along here and stopped, probably because they slipped, and then continued but left that spot blank. So it just goes to show you that even somebody who does this every single day has trouble with bell seams. It's an incredibly tricky part of the saxophone. So basically right now I'm going to continue working on the main design, and eventually I'll make my way over there. When I'm working, I typically, even though I'm designing this on the fly, I like to think of flow, and I like to think about maybe the long-term flow, about how when you're going to bring pieces of the pattern around, you want to see some of these bigger lines. If it's just a big clump, design-wise, it doesn't look as appealing, especially if it's over the whole horn. So right now I'm working on bringing this loop around, up, and probably around like that, and it will eventually curl around the engraving, I'm sure. So But with these designs, you never know how it's going to turn out until it's done. And especially if you slip and you have to change plans. So right now I'm going to go ahead and try and finish up this spiral right here. What I'm going to do is bring this branch around like that and have it fold over. And bring this around. So now this is always an interesting design challenge. Right now you see this space right here is kind of got an odd shape to it. You're basically constrained by the bell bow here, the brace, and you have these V shapes. Whenever you're working in circles, whenever you diverge another circle from another, like in this spot, you get this V shape. Now a lot of engravers in the past would basically create some sort of fill that fills up this area here, either a leaf or something or a flower, and then continue working out from there. Now I tend to not do that. I like to continue circles as much as possible. So in this space, what I might do is actually continue this around and have this leaf come up and bring around that way and fill from the bottom as opposed to continuing this shape. Because again, I really want to see this long line develop around this area right here. Okay, now I'm taking a little break here to look at this design. Talked about this area right here before, and you can see it's a little more filled out and we're getting a little shape there. And what I want to try and do is add a little bit of depth. And one of the ways to do that is to have areas like this where you have this line that goes around and then you have another pattern that goes underneath it. So what I think I'm going to do is actually bring some sort of long pattern around like this and maybe around like that and have those cross, and that'll help add a little depth right there. So I don't want to actually complete the full pattern, because if you're ever doing a section like this where you think you might cross over, it's always easier to leave spaces so you can add that depth later, because when you do a straight line like this, you are basically forced to go under it as opposed to having a section that goes over. And this is how Celtic knots and a lot of under-over patterns are done. So what I'm going to do is bring this straight line over and not really worry about where it's going right this second. And what I think I'll do is bring another line over it, although I think this actually might be a good spot for a double line. So let's do this. Bring another line halfway. And the reason I did that is that if we are going to do some sort of under-over pattern there, as this one comes around, we can go over that and under that. So I'm going to go ahead and get that going. Again, we're not really worrying about anything except just the line, and how it ends we'll figure out in just a moment. And you can see that that's already adding a lot of texture and depth. Now, because a general rule is if you do over and over-under lines, when you do an underline like that, you know always if you're going to continue that it's going to be longer than the next sectional line. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and carry it forward like so and make it slightly longer than the one underneath it.